It's great to be here and really appreciate Donna, Joel and Sharon for inviting us and letting us be a part of your family. Just sensing a great spirit in the house of worship, of loving Jesus, and of stuff that flows out. And just hearing all the things you're doing at this Christmas season, you ought to be congratulated. I've got my lovely wife here, just so you know that I'm originally from South Africa, and you already worked that out. I came across in 1980, the second day in the country. I met my wife in church, unbelievably spiritual moment. It was in Sydney, worshiping. She was playing the piano. I looked up and I thought, check that chick out. And 11 months later, we're married. And as far as I'm concerned, I married up, and some of us pole vaulted, didn't you, Joel? So Linda, why don't you just stand up and say a quick hi to people? And she's a bit of a babe. Are any of the East campers here? Yeah, well, let's give them a great welcome because appreciate you making the move. I had nothing to do with it. It's all Joel's fault. And so we're in the middle of a series called Confessions of a Pastor, I believe. And I just want to know, Joel, is this an 18-month or 2-year series for you? Because I reckon you got quite a bit to confess. Well, I want to talk about conflict. And I just want to do a little bit of an intro. And my subtitle is I Hated, Avoided, Ran from Conflict. But I'm going to explain that in just a moment. Gary Smalley, who is an absolute relationship guru, a Christian guy, says life is relationships. The rest are just details. And when you really think of it, that's what life is all about. It's about relationships. There's almost nothing you do that in some way doesn't interact or affect your relationships. And when relationships are great, life's great. And when relationships are bad, life's terrible. And we need to understand there's some frameworks that the Bible gives us for relationships. And obviously we don't have time to deal with all this stuff, but there's kind of a summarizing statement that the Apostle Paul gives in Romans 13, verse 8 to 10. And I just want to read it. I'm not going to break down the whole passage here. But he's speaking about relationships, and he's actually laying hold of something that Jesus also said about a commandment to love one another. And he's kind of tying a few things together. So he's relying on the statement of Jesus and his insight into relationships. He says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. That's a challenge. For whosoever loves has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And listen to this next statement. And whatever other commandment may be, are all summed up by one commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to its neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law. Now, I don't know if we fully get the enormity of what the Apostle Paul is saying here. When he's saying there's just one commandment that replaces everything else. Whatever other commandment there may be, he says, you can summarize it, live it out, make it a reality if you just hang on and outlive this one commandment. The context is from a Jewish background where they had 613 commandments to obey. And just to help you a little bit on that, there were 248 positive ones. In other words, 248 that encouraged you to do something good, and 365 negative, thou shalt nots. So you had one thou shalt not for every single day, but you had to do all 365 every single day and all 248s every single day. And he said you can take all of those things and you can summarize them in this one commandment. You can simplify your life under the power of Jesus, under the power of his grace. The second key thing that I observe out of the passage is that people don't owe us, we owe them. And if you only took that away this morning, it would change your mindset about relationships. Because we go into so many circumstances with an attitude, they owe me something. They owe me recognition, they owe me affection, they owe me this, they owe me that. And he says, no, you got it all wrong. You have an ongoing debt that needs to be paid to the rest of humanity. Isn't that what he says? have all your other debts paid except this debt of love. You will never extinguish that debt. And that's why we touch our communities. That's why we sponsor children. That's why we go on mission trips. That's why we invite people to Carol's events, because we are indebted to them. We owe them the debt of love. And the third simple thing before we launch into this conflict situation is that in this one commandment, both Jesus, as I mentioned, Paul's drawing on the wisdom and the teaching of Jesus, both Jesus and Paul call us to ideals in relationships. And our experience doesn't always live up to that. Whether it's in the marriage relationship, our husbands, wives, kids, friendships, the ideals of Jesus and Paul are incredibly difficult to live in. And what we try to do after a while, if we don't get the spirit and the power of the grace that we live under, is we begin to dumb down what Jesus said. We begin to dumb down what Paul says. And so we settle for less. And I want to encourage you that don't ever do that when it comes to relationships. Don't do it when it comes to the Word of God. Jesus says no matter what your real experience is, if you look at your real and you go, I've messed up, I've missed the mark, this is so broken, I don't know how I'm going to fix this. He says don't dumb it down just to make yourself feel better. Don't settle for the real and go, well, they're not doing that good and the next door neighbors aren't doing that good and so and so. He says, don't dumb it down. He says, go for the ideal. But you go, but what I failed, yeah, I'll forgive you. And then go for it again. You see, that's the power of grace. He points to the ideal, but he refuses to condemn us for our failure. And so don't normalize. Say, no, I want the best. I want the ideal. I want what Jesus says for me to have. There are 5 things that we have in common when it comes to relationships. Number 1, you don't get to choose your family. Wouldn't there be some options there? Number 2, there's at one or other point in your life you wanted somebody else's family. Just think about it. I can remember as a kid living across the road was a family that seemed better off than us financially, had a pool that we were allowed to swim on in occasionally, and they just went on overseas trips, and we didn't do that stuff. It was like, I wish I could trade my family. I just want that family. Parents, you've occasionally thought of trading your kids in supermarkets and malls and other little places where they just become quite exhibitionist. So we've all wanted somebody else's family. We thought, oh, gee, they would be, and they don't have to do homework and all the rest of it. The third thing is that no one that you are related to or who you know is as smart as you when it comes to the issues of relationships. And if you could just gather everybody together, sit them down, tell them to shut up and listen, you could fix a whole lot of things. You need to take a bath. You need to get out of bed earlier. You need to go to work. You need to talk less. And you could just sort a whole lot of stuff out, couldn't you? Because nobody is as smart as you when it comes to relationships. The fourth thing is we all feel that we've failed at some other point in relationships. There's something in our heart, in our memory, in our experience where we go, I just messed that completely. And I don't know if I can ever fix it. Which leads to the fifth thing is that our greatest disappointment and pain in life is connected to relationships. Things don't hurt you, relationships do. Things don't disappoint, relationships disappoint. Things don't break your heart, relationships do. And the final thing which launches us into what we want to talk about, my confessions in terms of conflict, is that relationships, no matter how good they are, all come with conflict. Conflict is a common factor in relationships. No matter how good your relationships are, no matter how long-standing they've been, there is going to be some kind of conflict sometime, somewhere in it. And right now, some of you, the conflict started on the way to church in the car. And they were, stop it, and I'll belt you if you do that to your sister one more time. And then you drive up here and they walk, oh, hello, oh, praise the Lord. Thank you, Jesus. It could be as trivial as that. or the fact that there's something really tearing in a friendship, in a marriage, between parents and children, whatever the case may be. And conflict in any close relationship is incredibly complicated and emotional because it's close. It's close to you. It affects stuff that touch your heart, touches your emotions. There's so much stuff that goes on in conflict when it's close to you. And there's this astonishing thing. You can win an argument in a court case and actually feel like you won because they owe you money. You know, they're going to pay this, they're going to fix that. But you can win an argument in a family, in a close relationship, and just feel like you lost because something got damaged in the conflict, in the relationship. It's interesting, and this comes to my confession, how people deal with conflict. I hated it. I'm not a great fan of it now, but I've learned to do it. But I was so bad that if something had even gone wrong, I'd somehow or other bought the wrong thing in a shop, I'd say to Linda, you go and change it. Because I didn't want to tell somebody, get in conflict, I picked up the wrong thing, or you gave me the wrong thing. Or if it was a phone issue, no, you phoned them, sweetie. You're so good with people. And what it was, I just didn't want to talk to anybody about conflict. There's situations in leadership that I look back on, and I think I just avoided. Other people suffered because I wouldn't deal with the issue. And I've had to learn how to deal with it. Now, I'm not talking about enjoying conflict. Oh, goody, bring it on. There is something wrong for you, and we'll have deep deliverance going on here. Get those demons out of you in the name of Jesus. We're not talking about loving conflict, but learning to do it in a way that allows the relationship to breathe, to live, to regenerate. We all deal with conflict differently, and here's just a few thoughts. There's the peacekeeper. I didn't say the peacemaker. We're talking about United Nations kind of people. They just go in and watch conflict happen around them. The peacekeepers. And they are people who want peace at any cost. In fact, when a conflict breaks out in a family, in a situation, they just go really silent most of the time. And they just shut down. And then when it's over, they go around to all the parties and they give them little hugs and, you okay? You okay? Because all they want is peace at any cost. They just get so disturbed. So, are you okay? Do you need a hug? Oh, I love you. You're just so wonderful. But they do it to everybody because they just want the peace. There's some of these people in your families, you'll recognize them. Keep your elbows to yourself. None of this, well, that's you. Then there's the sulker in relationships. They have after the conflict, they just sigh and moan a lot. And if you ask them how they are you okay? I'm fine. It's that kind of little, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. And it's that kind of thing. And they just want everybody to know that they hurt and they live in the thing. Then there's a stuffer. A stuffer is just somebody who seems totally impervious to anything that is said in a conflict. Anything is done, they just kind of take it. And it's like they've got this vault that is so strong that they just take that emotion, shove it in there, lock it. Take the next emotion, shove it in there, and lock it. And you just get no sense of, is this having an impact? Where are they up to in this? But you know there's going to come a day when that vault won't contain all the pressure of the stuffed-in relation, and they will just explode one day. And there'll be guts scattered all over the room and stuff because of what happened there. They'll blow the roof off. And then some of you came out of this next group, the screamers. In fact, there are whole families that are just screamers. And that's the way they resolve. And it's under the auspices that let's get it out on the table. Let's get it out in the open. They can all talk about it. And if I yell the loudest, then I'll win the argument. And if you are a peacemaker or a sulker, or if you're a stuffer and you marry a screamer, the first conflict is like, oh my God. Where did you come from? I rebuke you, you demon, you. It's kind of like, what are you screaming about? It's just, But the screamer, the loudest screamer takes all. And then there's the one that I just hate the most, because there's one of these in our family, and it's not the lovely Linda. She's very good with conflict. It's the litigator. And the litigators live for conflict. They just love conflict. And they will argue about anything, anytime, from every point of view, and they are never wrong. And they acknowledge that they are never wrong, and that there is a faint possibility that one day they could be wrong, but they're not wrong in this instance, for this reason, for this reason, for this reason. And no matter what you say, they've got a response. And you just want to slap them. They live to win. So those are some of the different ways people deal with conflict. But James, the brother of Jesus, gives us an incredible insight into the whole topic of conflict. And I just find that a pretty cool thought. James, the brother of Jesus. If you ever want evidence that Jesus is who he said he is, just think about James, the brother of Jesus. And what I mean, if you think, well, what's that about? What about the resurrection's awesome. But what would it take for you to convince your brothers or sister that you were God the Messiah? What would you have to do? You go, look at me, Messiah. Bow down, a bit of worship would be appropriate now. You know, what would you have to do? Isn't that a cool thought? And at one time, James didn't believe, but he comes to this point, and he doesn't even claim the half-brother status. He just claims Jesus as his Messiah. That's evidence to me. That's powerful, you know. And James is so direct that they called him Camel Knees because he was a great prayer warrior, but he was renowned for being blunt, in your face. So it's not me, it's James, if you get offended today, okay? And I'm just suggesting, if you actually act on some of the very practical things that James tells us to do, right now you can shift something in your relationships. James chapter 4, verse 1 to 3. Notice how he just launches into it. What causes fights and quarrels among you? What causes conflict? Oh, thank you for bringing up the subject, James. Let's see what you've got to say. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. And when you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Whoa, back off, James. Just slow down. Well, let's just break it down a little bit. The first issue that James goes to that is paramount in the way we deal with conflict is the whole blame game thing. And it's not new to humanity. It starts way back in the Garden of Eden. And it's basically, God, if you hadn't given me this woman, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's as simple as that. And we keep going back there to blame somebody. And somebody terrible said that Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent, and the serpent didn't have a leg to stand on. I just had to put a dad joke in somewhere. I just had it just for little Jolie's sake. And because he mocks me about my dad jokes, but I think they're actually quite good. Anyway, the blame game, James 4 verse 1. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Now notice something here. James doesn't say who causes them, because if we ask that question, there would be fingers and elbows flying all over the place. Right now it would be, you caused them. No, it's you that does it. It's them over there that caused them. And that's the kind of question we would ask. Who causes it? And he goes, let's not go there. Let's not go the blame route. He says, what causes them? What causes it? Because when we start blaming, we actually move the whole thing into a different situation, even if what the person did was wrong. I'm talking about this attitude of blame, of dismissing, of shifting responsibility. We would answer the question, it's not me, it's them, it's him, it's her, if only that hadn't happened. And here's the thought, and I don't have a lot of time on this particular thought, but you know what's crazy about the blame game? Here is someone who, in your perception, has done something to you that hurts you and has taken away your joy, your happiness. And so what you do when you blame them is that you take your happiness, your joy, and you package it and you put it into the hands of the person who hurt you and said, you've hurt me, you've removed my happiness, you keep it until you're ready to give it back because I can't be happy until you. Do you get that? It's just bizarre. You give the person who hurt you the power to either give your happiness back by apologizing or asking for forgiveness or rectifying, and you just will not be happy until they do it. That's what the blame game does. The very person that made you unhappy, you empower them to make you even more unhappy. That's what blaming does. James goes, no. It's a little more complicated than that. They're just pointing the finger at somebody else or a group of people. He says the issue is inside of you. And you go, whoa, back off, buddy. Don't you get near me. No, just sit and listen. You can blame Pastor Joel for inviting me if you don't agree with me. If you really need to blame somebody, it's his fault. Oh, dear. James 4 verse 1. He says, this is the second part of the statement. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? James is saying there's a common source for conflict. And it's not others, it's not external, it's not unimportant what others do. I'm not saying that. He says when you're in a conflict with people, there's another conflict that's going on inside you, a battle inside of you while this thing's going on outside of you. There's a conflict within you that helps generate and add fuel to the fire of the conflict outside of you. And here comes the key. I mean, James is just so wise in this. He's so profound. He says the third thing you need to understand, number one, don't blame. Understand, secondly, that there's something going on inside of you that's adding to the conflict. And he says, thirdly, you want something. Listen to how he puts it in verse 2. You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. I'll come to that. You covet, here's the key, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. And if you get this, it'll begin to shift the way you do relationships. It will begin to shift the issues in conflict. That when you're in conflict, you've got to admit to yourself, I actually want something and I'm not getting it. That's why I'm still fighting about it. That's why I want somebody. I want you to change your behavior. I want you to mow the lawn. I want you to pay back the money you owe me. I want something. I want to be recognized, and you don't recognize me. I want something. Now, we're not saying whether it's good, bad, or anything yet about what you want, but just admitting when you're in that conflict, can you identify what it is you actually want? Rather than just fighting and not understanding that you really want something and you're not getting it, and that's why you fight and quarrel. You need to think about that for a moment. So I'm telling you, if you get this, it changes relationships. When you're even talking to somebody who's fighting, begin to ask them, what is it that you actually want? Can you articulate what you want? James goes on to say, so you kill. Now, James is actually talking to a group of very nice followers of Jesus. And I don't think he's actually talking about mass murder going on here. I don't think he's talking about people picking up knives and clubs and that kind of thing. He says, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. Sometimes you and I want things so much in a relationship that we are willing to hurt the people closest to us to get it. We are willing to kill something in the relationship just so we can get what we want. And at times we know it. We know this is going to damage, but I want it. And I'll kill the relationship. And you can look and marriages that are in trouble, that they want something and nobody's going to give ground, and so the relationship get killed. You can have stories between parents and children. The parents wanted this, the kids wanted that. Now they don't talk to each other. And if they do, family reunions are not much fun at all. And we can go on to example, but you understand the principle. People belittle and shame each other, destroy self-esteem, criticize because they want something and they're not getting it. I need to finish. No, I've got time. I just saw 45 and it was seconds. But I've actually got minutes. I can breathe. I can slow down. I was waiting for the platform to just open for me to disappear. Because he threatened me. And I just wanted him to have a lot to practice on when it comes to conflict at the end of this. And so how do we resolve conflict? We've kind of explained the essence. And James's wisdom is profound. You want something, you're not getting it, so you fight and you prepare to kill things in relationships to get what you want. James, in leading into this, talks about two kinds of wisdom. And it's really important that we take, with this chapter breaks and we miss it, that we bring the end of chapter 3 into this conversation. Because when he wrote it, they weren't separated. But because of chapter breaks, we kind of have our heads separated. And we've got to say, what kind of wisdom do I want to live my life with? Listen to how he says here, life-giving wisdom. James 3:15 through 18. I just want to read it and just listen to the different kind of wisdom and the outcome. He says, for jealousy, he's talked about jealousy in the passage that we've just been dealing. You want, you covet, you desire something. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. You'll find chaos. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. And then he talks about conflict that we've just dealt with. He says, when it comes to your relationships, there's two kinds of wisdom. There's the wisdom that wins the war, and then there's the wisdom that wins the person. Which one do you want? Which option are you going to take? And if you're going to choose the one that wins people, it doesn't mean that you're a walkover, that you don't have to deal with some issues and sort some things out, and there's not some real things. But your approach is going to be totally different. Your approach is going to seek to bring real peace into a situation. At times, it's going to yield. You don't have to win every single point. Now, I know for the litigators here, you're already having issues. You want to argue with me and prove that I'm wrong. And actually, you're wrong. James says so. Because I don't want to fight with you. I really don't want to fight with you. Full of mercy and good deeds. Those are the things. So how do we deal with this? Now, number one, if you want to just break that conflict, as James gives us instruction, you've got to own your part of it. You've got to own it. So you know what James says, James 4 verse 1 to 2. What causes fights and quarrels among you? That was the question. The simple answer he gives us, you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. Don't blame others in the middle of a conflict, whether it's a big thing or a small thing. Just ask yourself the question, what is it that I actually want? And if we would admit that, we may begin to have a different kind of conversation about what we want and what we're fighting about. And this could even be a cool thing to do. I'm trying to find the moment. But Linda's heard this before, so I can't do it with her. But I'm going to do it with somebody one day. It's just in the middle of the discussion, and when it's getting a little bit heated, go, whoa, 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 whoa. I've just realized something. Something has just dawned on me. I want something, and I'm not getting it. Can you imagine? Whoa, I just realized I actually want something in this, and I'm not getting it. I'm telling you, right, just that little phrase right there, people go, what do you want? You've changed the conversation. Would calm things down. If you said, do you know what part of the problem is? I want something and I'm not getting it. Let's talk about that. It may not be the entire problem. And I'm telling you, most of you will go, oh, that was nice, but you won't do this. But I want to challenge you. Do it. Try it. There can be other things within that conversation that need to be sorted. There can be behavior that could be inappropriate. We're not dealing with that. We're just trying to identify what you want and why you want it. A marriage counselor who for years did this used to draw a circle, like a pie chart, to indicate a pie chart. And say, let's pretend this summarizes, this circle here is all of the problems that you've told me about over the last few weeks. Everything is in there. Okay. He says, now, it had a pencil to each person, the husband, the wife. He said, now, I want you, like in a pie chart, just to own your slice of it. And it could be that in your opinion it's just 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%. Yeah, I'm not saying you have to own the whole thing. Just own your slice of it. He said in 10 years of doing it, not one couple ever picked up a pen or pencil and owned a slice. They'd rather blame each other. And here's the thought. If you own a slice, you got to be nice. If you own a slice, you're actually admitting, I've got something to work on. But we'd rather just go, it's you. You're the problem in my life. You this and you this and you that. And he said, no. And James is saying, just own your slice. Take an acknowledgement that you want something, which means you've got something to work on in the relationship. Even if you're not the prime problem, you're still saying, I can do something. The second thing, and this, honestly, this is gold. James is so practical. He's so wise. He says, how about before you go to war about what you want, before you argue and have conflict, how about you pray and ask God what he thinks about what you want? I wonder how many discussions would change just on that alone. He says, notice it's all part of the context. He says, you do not have because you do not ask God. He says, you want something and you're not getting it, and that's why you're fighting and quarrel. But he says, one of the problems is you haven't even asked God about what you want. It's gone very quiet in here. Listen to verse 2. You do not have because you do not ask God. And then he says later in verse 2, and you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You have not asked God about these things. Two things happen when you pray about what you want. I'm talking about in the context of a conflict. When you just take a moment to kneel, to sit down, to as you walk into that situation, say, God, I just want to present what I want. I've identified it, but I want to present you. And one or two things are going to happen. You might just get a revelation that what you're asking for is something that that person has absolutely no ability to give you. There's a story in the Old Testament, Rachel and Leah. It was a messed up family situation when you really look at it, because this guy had two wives. He told one of them which was his favorite. Can you imagine living in that kind of atmosphere? Sweetie, you're my favorite. Your kids are my favorite. And we've got you. Can you imagine? What's that setting up? And that's the situation. And Rachel couldn't have children. And Leah, who was not the favorite, was having all the children. And when Rachel saw, this is Genesis 30, when Rachel saw that she wasn't having any children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister. Isn't jealousy? You want something that somebody else has got? That's the same concept that James is talking about. So she pleaded with Jacob, give me children or I die. And then Jacob became furious with Rachel and he said, am I God to answer this for you? And sometimes we fight about things because we're wanting something from somebody that has to do with self-esteem, that has to do with the work that God needs to do in our heart and lives. And we're making them our God. We're saying, you give it to me. And they go, I can't. This is something God needs to give you. This is something God needs to settle in your heart and life. The second thing that'll happen is you'll begin to think, when you're praying about it, maybe my motive's not that good. Because that's the next thing that James talks about. He says, when you ask, this is James 4 verse 3, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives. And sometimes in relationships, even the closest ones, we just want to win the argument. It's almost like kids in a playground where a kid will reach out and grab another kid's toy and then not even play with it, but they just want it. And we bring that stuff up into our relationships. And James is saying, find out in your own heart, what is it that you want? Why is it that you quarrel? Not who, don't blame. He says, and then pray about it. And maybe you'll get a revelation that God needs to do a work in your heart. And secondly, that you've really gone about this with the wrong motive. Now, it doesn't exclude the reality that there could be something that conversation still needs to be had, but it's going to be had in a different spirit, with a different attitude, and not with the spirit of blame coming with it. I want the musicians to come. I actually bring this into just about every conversation I have now, this thought. This person wants something. I wonder if I can find out what it is. Because if I can unlock that, we can avoid a conflict, and maybe I can help them. I can either say, look, you wanting something that I just can't give you. It's not in my power to do it. Or I think you want this, but it may not be for the right reason. And this is what I'm seeing, Or, yeah, we can do that. I think I can make that adjustment and change in that part of my life to accommodate this and to do that. But it's going to take a little bit of work to deal with conflict in a godly way. And the final thing that James says is, when you come to conflict, go humble. I'm going to be careful of this. Sometimes humble is mean, I get trodden on, people just roll it. No, that's not humility. Jesus was humble but incredibly strong. It's about an attitude. It's about an approach to a situation. You go in with humility. And we often go into an argument with this thought, it's not fair. It's just not fair. It's like, we're almost like back in the schoolyard. Not fair. Can I suggest to you, you don't even believe in fair unless you're going to be the beneficiary. No, just hear me. Just, if you're in a big shopping center looking for a car park, and Pastor Joel has been driving around for half an hour, and you come around the corner and a car pulls out just behind him. You just zip in there. You don't say, Pastor Joel, would you like this car park? I know you've been looking for one for half an hour. You just go, oh, thank you, Jesus, for answering my prayers. I knew I was more spiritual than him. You don't sit there pounding the steering wheel. It's not fair. I got to park immediately. He drove around for 30 minutes. He's still driving. You see, we don't believe in fair unless we think we're going to be the beneficiary. And James says, forget the fair stuff. He says, he gives grace to the humble. More grace to the humble. And that's what we need in our relationships. God's grace. He opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble and the oppressed. Grace to the humble, more grace. I'm going to hand back to Pastor Joel to talk to you about relationship with Jesus. But here's the thing. We ought to thank God that he's not into fair. If he was into fair, what's fair is for you and I to go straight to hell without any opportunity for forgiveness, for redemption. That's what's fair. The cross was not fair, but it brought justice. It brought forgiveness. It brought this extraordinary thing called the grace of God that transforms our lives, that brings Jesus' life into our lives. So give up on the fair thing. And just, whether it's your relationship with God, your relationship with others, go humble. Stressing, doesn't have to be weak, pathetic. Just go humble. Practice these few simple things in conflict, and I believe God will transform relationships, restore some. God bless you, church. Thank you, Pastor Joel.